watched movies that have a plot and a quest of some sort that we can name, we can talk about. We think of Star Wars. The quest is the Empire versus the rebels. Who's going to win? Will the rebels make it in the end? Or we can think of Lord of the Rings, the quest. Get the ring, throw it in the fire. There's 3 movies for that. Or The Lion King, Simba, regain the kingdom. Go and avenge your father, right? Or there's The Princess Bride. I don't really know what the quest, True Love or something. But all of these movies, not only do they have the quests, and this major plot, they also have a subplot going on underneath. So if you think of the Star Wars, there's the Empire versus Rebels thing, but there's also Luke being trained to be a Jedi with Yoda. And then there's Leia and Princess Leia and Han Solo or whatever his name is. And there's all that emotional tension going on. There's The Lion King, you've got Pumbaa and Timon, and they're all this light relief and comic, and they eventually encourage Simba to go and do the right thing and, take over the kingdom or whatever. I mean, The Princess Bride has Inigo Montoya, you killed my father, today. And I could go on, but you get the idea. All these movies have subplots, and a subplot does a number of things. It's related to the plot line, sometimes very intimately, and they're generally tied to individual characters, and those characters interact with the main character to shed light on that character in some way. They have this relationship with the protagonist that is quite shaped really around who they are as a character. And often they are archetypes, like a real stereotypical character of some sort. Crucially, subplots provide sub-themes that amplify and widen the meaning of the story's central theme. So this quote from Joseph Campbell says, in sum, subplots open doorways into the soul of a story, a presence that is intimately connected with a dynamic that lies at the centre of the hero's journey, from Metamorphosis. So, aside from giving you a mini English lesson, what do subplots have to do with Joshua and Rahab? Well, in the book of Joshua, the big plot is the Israelites entering the land. So God promised this land of Canaan to Abraham generations before. And the Israelites have been wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years, but they're now ready to go in and take possession of the land. And God has promised he's going to give them rest in this land. So that's the main plot, you would think, of the book of Joshua, that the Israelites are going to enter the land and take it over. So it's a conquest story, right? It's a war narrative with strategies and battle tales. And that's what we're expecting when we come to Joshua. And war is very much a part of human history. Every culture, every era, every tribe has fought battles and wars, taken over other lands, other villages, other continents sometimes. There's nothing surprising, there's nothing shocking about this. Wars were fought in the ancient world, wars are fought in our world today. As humans, we cannot seem to get away from war. But then, in Joshua, we get to chapter 2, which Stephen just read. And maybe this is a subplot. So Joshua sends out spies to spy out the land, secretly, in fact. Not 12, like he was sent from Moses years before. There are just 2 spies. and they are meant to go and check out Jericho. And you would think spies, and this is a military operation, it's covert, but it's military, so you would think, oh, there should be terrain, and there should be tactics and numbers, and what do they have to do, defences, how are they going to take over Jericho? But there's absolutely none of that in the narrative. Instead, it goes directly, do not pass go directly to, they went to the house of the prostitute, Rahab. So, verse 1, then Joshua son of Nun secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim, go look over the land, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. Now, it's quite possible that Rahab's house was where you went if you wanted to blend in, to be anonymous, needed somewhere to stay the night, sort of like an inn or maybe even a hotel that we would have today. If you didn't know anyone in the town, you couldn't stay with any friend, no one was taking you in, presumably they were spies, they didn't know anybody there, and they didn't want anybody to know that they were there perhaps. So that's maybe where you went. So while Rahab is named as a prostitute, they didn't necessarily go there for sex. Of course that is possible, but it's a little bit vague. We can't rule it out, but in this case, do not take the Bible literally and think, well, the spies went, I can. So, okay, just a word of warning. This is why we don't read the Bible quite completely literally. But whatever the situation was, it was clearly a bit of a fail on the espionage front, because the king knew pretty much straight away, it seems, that they were there. So he sends messages, and he knows their mission already, and he is onto them. And he sends messages to Rahab. And Rahab has hidden the men, but she denies that and says, no, they're gone. And she sends the messengers out of town on basically a wild goose chase. So, verse 7, she says, so the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. So basically, she sent them going one way and knowing full well they were in her house. And then in verse 8 and 9, we get this explanation for her actions. Why has she done this? So in verses 4 to 7, it's like the narrative speeds up. Like even the Hebrew here is really choppy, is falling over itself almost, if you like, to describe, to like it chops and changes and sort of a bit here and there, almost as though the narrator is in a hurry to get to this explanation, verse 8 to 9 and 9 to 11. So before the spies lay down for the night, she went up to the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Basically, she says the whole nation is petrified because we've heard about your God and what he's done for you guys. But her fear has actually moved her to faith. Verse 11, for the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. So she's a Canaanite. They have multiple gods that demand all kinds of horrendous things of the people. But what she's heard about the Israelite God, Yahweh, has convinced her that this is a God with actual power, who works for his people, who commands respect and obedience. And she wants to be a part of that. She names him Yahweh, which is a big deal. I mean, she's essentially betraying her own people here. So she is actually the successful spy in this. Her espionage and her plan actually worked. And her faith in Yahweh motivates her actions. Yes, she tells a lie to conceal the spies, but she's determined to protect her family. And she seems to have a genuine faith in this acknowledgement of Yahweh and who he is. So she's an outsider. She's a foreigner to the Israelites. And they've been commanded to completely destroy this people. She is totally typical of who they are supposed to destroy. And yet her terms are accepted. And ultimately, she is accepted. And we see this in the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1. And we see it in Ruth. She is the grandma of Boaz. And we see her acceptance again in James chapter 2, verse 25, and Hebrews 11. She is named as a woman of faith. And this is in stark contrast to Achan, who we're going to look at next week, who is an insider. He is an Israelite who does almost the opposite and the reverse of Rahab. So those chapters are put together for a reason, so we can see this contrast. And I think one of the things that we're meant to see from Rahab's life is that God's grace and his revelation are not limited to insiders. They're not limited to God's people. They're not limited to the Israelites in this time, and God's grace is not limited to us as the church today. Even in this situation of Israel conquering the land and the description of the wickedness of the Canaanites, God's grace and mercy was and still is at work for those who are paying attention. And so Rahab makes this agreement with the spies to save her family. Note, it's her mother and her father and her sisters and her brothers. So it appears she has no children at this time. And so the spies put their lives on the line. If they fail to deliver on this promise, their lives will be forfeit. And they agree that the sign will be a scarlet cord in the window. And that if she doesn't keep her side of the bargain, if she doesn't hang out this scarlet cord, then they're off the hook. And if anyone leaves the house and isn't in the house when they attack, then that's on her. It's not on them. Okay? And so her house is conveniently placed in the wall of the city, and so she lets them down a rope to escape, not a scarlet cord. After they've gone, she ties the scarlet cord in the window. And so then we jump to chapter 6, where the story continues. The main plot continues. So the Israelites have now crossed the Jordan, and they've purified themselves, and Tintin talked about this last week, how they crossed and circumcised, in fact, and now they are set to attack Jericho. So first of all, in chapter 6, we get these instructions from God about how to take the city. And they're very, very detailed instructions. And they are not really military instructions at all. They are to walk around the city with the priests once a day, with horns sounding as they walk around, And there's no yelling, there's no yahooing, there's no war cries or any of that. And the Ark of the Covenant will be at the centre of this quite strange procession that will circle the city for 6 days. So God is at the centre of this. So it's not so much a military attack, but a religious ritual that they're going through. So God is very much at the centre of this. This is a priestly occasion and a religious ritual that's going on. And we see this emphasis of the spiritual nature of this battle in the emphasis on the number 7. So this is repeated 14 times in this chapter. There are 7 priests. There are 7 trumpets. There are 7 days. On the 7th day, they march around 7 times. So 7 is the number of completeness and perfection and totality in the Bible. And on the 7th day, when they march around, they finally get to make some noise. And they give this great shout at the end of this march. And the blow on the trumpets and the walls come tumbling down. And you may know a song about that. So from verse 16, the 7th time around, when the priests sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the army, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. The city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall be spared, because she hid the spies we sent. But keep away from the devoted things, so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise, you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. All the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury." So the Israelites capture the city, but they are not to take a single thing from it. No loot, no plunder, no people, no slaves, nothing. It is all sacred to God. And the NIV translates it as devoted in verse 17. And this is the Hebrew word cherem. And I'm going to go into this a little bit because this word is found quite a lot in Joshua. And it's quite a significant word. So basically, cherem means to devote to the Lord, or devote to destruction. So we see in verse 18, "But keep away from the cherem things, so that you will not bring about your own cherem by taking any of them. Otherwise you will make the camp of Israel liable to cherem and bring trouble on it." I may have got that completely wrong, but John can correct me later. So it is to completely consecrate something to God as an offering, either by death or sacrifice. And essentially, you can't take it back. You can't want it. You can't recall it or redeem it in any way. It's gone. It's off limits, and it's God's. And Jericho is to be treated in this way, to be destroyed completely as cherem, devoted to God. So in verse 20, "When the trumpet sounded, the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed, so everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. They devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep, and donkeys." Now, a lot has been written about this because, of course, the difficulty here is that this seems barbaric to our ears, and it seems extremely inconsistent with the Jesus that we find in the New Testament, right? And there are explanations, but to be perfectly honest, none of the explanations are completely satisfactory. So the two main explanations follow the idea that the Canaanites in the land had particularly heinous practices that included child sacrifice, and that these practices and prostitution, temple prostitution, etc., these practices had grown in their intensity over the 400 years since God first promised the land to Abraham. And so then we couple that with the impression that the Canaanites did not seem interested in Yahweh at all, or in changing their ways, which the Bible describes as hardness of hearts. And so basically there's a determination to sin, to continue in these ways. There's no wanting to change or wanting to come to God. Rahab in this is very much an exception of this. The Gibeonites, which we read about later in Joshua, are the only tribe that we read about that went to make a treaty with Israel. So that's one idea. And the other idea follows the importance of holiness in Israel as a nation. And we looked at some of that last year when we studied Leviticus. The Israelites were to be holy and set apart to God as a nation, as an example of love and justice to other nations. And in that, they were to be uncontaminated by other nations and by their sin, the sin of other nations. And while those explanations may seem harsh and they may not satisfy our desire for clear answers, what is clear is that the obedience of the Israelites was of critical importance to God. It's also clear that they frequently got it wrong and messed up, as we'll see next week. And our obedience is also crucially important to God. And this is something that I think we often ignore or diminish when we read these stories. We look at these stories and we see a seriousness to them, that God takes the Israelites' actions seriously, and God takes our actions seriously today. Our obedience to Him is a serious matter to God. But in saying that, we are also not to take these texts literally as examples to follow. And unfortunately, this has been done with the book of Joshua in the past. So this is the idea that, oh well, God is on our side because we're morally superior in some way, and so we can, the reasoning is that we'll invoke God, and then that justifies us trampling on other people or other tribes or other races, and we'll just bring God into the mix and say it's all good. We're just being like Joshua. And unfortunately, that has happened in the past. So we can't be like Joshua and say, oh look, we're just going to fight a holy war and claim that God's a part of it. See, when we do that, we turn from a focus on submission and obedience to God, which is actually what we see in Jesus in the New Testament, was always focused on obedience and submission to God. And we contrast that with fighting for our own agenda and just adding God in. So, if we took the story literally, and this is why we don't always read the Bible literally, we would have the spies sleeping with prostitutes, and Rahab telling lies, and us going off to war and saying that God justified it. This is not how we are meant to read this book. This is not helpful. And the early church tended to look at these stories as much more allegorical or metaphorically and take lessons from them in that way. And so, given that these stories are from a long time ago, and we cannot possibly know all the finer details, or indeed the mind of God in the telling of these, how then do we respond to these? And maybe at this point it's useful to look back at the characters in this narrative. Because are we sometimes like the Canaanites? We are oblivious to God and we reject him. We pursue our own interests, whatever they might be, at the expense of others, and never mind what other people might be on about. Or are we like Rahab? We've heard about God. We've understood what he offers, and we want what he offers. We want what they want, what they've got. That was Rahab. I want what you've got. I want your God. I want to follow your God. She wanted a God that was powerful and just. And when she heard about him, when the opportunity came, she accepted him. Or are we like the spies? We're noticing and observing, looking out for the people who God is calling. Are we paying attention to where God is at work and listening to what he is saying to them? Are we paying attention to be able to learn and teach who really God is? See, Rahab hung a cord out her window, a scarlet cord, which has many symbolic aspects, which connections over the years have been drawn out. And one connection is taken from this genealogy of Jesus that we find in Matthew chapter 1. There are 4 women mentioned in that chapter of the genealogy of Jesus. One is Rahab. Another is Tamar, the mother of Perez and Zerah. These were twins. And Tamar was another woman with an interesting backstory. But when those twins were born, Zerah, the first, put his hand out, and the midwife tied a scarlet cord around his wrist, the same word that's used here. And then he pulled it back, and the other twin came out first. But this was the identifier. The scarlet cord identified which one was first. And the scarlet cord identified Rahab and her house, which house was to be saved. It was a way of identifying the house that was for salvation. We started this sermon thinking about plots and subplots. But the main plot of the Bible is one that actually tells of God's desire to connect with humanity, to save us, to be with himself. And ultimately, that is fulfilled in Jesus. Joshua and Rahab are both subplots of that larger story. They contribute to that much bigger plot that is all about God's desire to draw us to himself. His ultimate plot to give us rest in himself. So in communion, we see these threads of connection and identity come together. As we take the bread and the wine, we identify with Jesus as we recognize his sacrifice for us, that through his birth and life and death and resurrection, that he chose to be with us, to save us, to be with himself. And so as you come to communion today, you'll see these threads on the table, these bookmarks or ribbons. And I'd like you to take one with you, they are just a symbol. They are just a reminder of what Rahab went through and what she hung in her window to remind, to tell the Israelites where she was. And so you can take these as a reminder of what Jesus has done for you. Just as Rahab's cord out the window saved her and her family, so too Jesus died to save each and every one of us. Rahab wasn't just a subplot. She is one of the reasons that God came to earth to be with us, so that people like Rahab and people like you and people like me could be with God. So God's grace is not limited to insiders. It is limitless. Let's pray. Dear Lord, I thank you that your grace reaches out to each one of us. I thank you that you reached out to Rahab to call her into your kingdom and into the lineage of your Son, Jesus. Lord, I thank you that we are also called into your kingdom and included in your plan of salvation. I pray you will remind us to look for where you are at work in people's lives and offer them the grace that you offer us. Help us to obey you even when things are difficult or seem confusing or your will seems hard. In your holy name we pray. Amen. And on the night that Jesus died, he took bread and he broke it. And he said, "This is my body broken for you. Come, eat and share in my body and my blood."